Good morning. I appreciate the invitation, and since I don't speak Swedish, I'm going to assume what she said was fantastic and made me sound really awesome. So I am going to talk about superfans, this idea of people who are incredibly enthusiastic about your brand and go out of their way to participate with each other, with you, hopefully. These are the confessions of a superfan. I'm going to share a little bit about what I hear on a regular basis and have heard for years. I can confess my own superfan nerdiness if you get me talking about photography, but we'll save that for the break. And just to clarify right up front, I am speaking on my own behalf with my own learnings over the years. I'm not necessarily speaking on behalf of any particular company or client, former or current. And to set up a little bit of my background, so I came to this whole superfan thing through working at Lego over the course of years in the early 2000s, and have sort of continued that work since. The interesting thing about my story is I actually started as a Lego superfan in the early days of the Lego adult fan community. When we talk about adult fans, you'll hear me talk about that throughout the speech, but the adult fans are people 18 plus who build amazing Lego creations and use Lego as a creative medium. Don't tell them it's a kid's toy. They'll show you a 6-foot-tall Statue of Liberty or a dinosaur that's the size of a living room and say this is not a kid's toy, this is a creative medium. And I spent a good portion of my time at Lego trying to convince the rest of the company that they didn't make a toy, that they did make a creative medium, and the way that we were going about selling was maybe not as advantageous to us in the long run as possible. And my tenure with Lego ended in 2006 when, about a month before I left, we had a Wired cover story about some of our work with fans helping to design the next generation of the Lego Mindstorms. And that work has continued on at Lego. I've had them as a client now. I continue to keep in touch with both my friends inside the company and my friends outside the company. And they're doing some really amazing work that continues from the work that we started, almost 20 years ago, where they are doing things like Lego Ideas that allow customers, fans, anybody around the world to design a model, upload it, and potentially have that turned into an official Lego set based on votes from users. They've formalized their engagement programs in a number of ways, including the Lego Ambassador program, where they have created an official designation for some fans who represent groups that get together and do amazing things, and they've formalized that connection to make it easier not only for the company to talk to customers, but vice versa as well. And interestingly, as I was preparing this presentation, I was looking around at photos. I noticed that this fan connection has expanded. The brand idea of what super fans are for Lego has expanded. There's a 5K run now called the Brick Run, which is, we've heard of the beer runs and the mud runs and whatever else. Now there's a brick run where you build with Lego at the end of the process, and it's all Lego themed. Which we know you've gotten into modern culture when you're putting together 5Ks that have your super fan theme. And my own personal note in my claim to fame is the minifig that you see behind you was actually representation of me. So I feel like my career in 2003 hit its high point, and I've been trying to keep up ever since. So as I get started and I talk about what I've learned about superfans, I'm going to use Lego as the example because it's a lot easier than talking about a lot of other types of examples. It's easy to sort of stay on one path. But I want to make sure that I'm very clear that, yes, Lego is a very interesting, very creative brand. It's got a lot of very active, very enthusiastic fans doing a lot of really cool, creative stuff. And every time I go to talk to clients these days who are in industries from oil and gas to travel to transportation, the first question they ask is, "Oh, I see you've been doing this for companies like Lego and Apple and Southwest Airlines, but they've got great fans already. They've got great brand. They've got a great product. It's very interesting. People love to talk about, love to get engaged with. Will this work for me?" And the answer is almost certainly yes. Most companies, most industries have some form of enthusiastic loyalist. Now, those may be a more B2B connection. They may be a B2C connection that's smaller or less obvious. But if we look at things like tech support, right? I ran the Apple support community for a while, and I was always fascinated with the fact that we had people who, like Fox Fifth here, who's earned almost 50,000 points, 2, 3, 4, 5 points at a time over the course of 10 plus years, doing nothing other than volunteering to answer tech support questions. There was an enthusiasm there. There was a desire to help. There was an intrinsic motivation that somebody like this person was getting out of answering questions and feeling helpful. And that's tech support around devices, and they were volunteering to do this. We see it with business support. So one of my clients is Southwest Airlines, and they've built a community for people to help other people address things like policy questions. Can I take a stroller? How can I take a stroller on a flight? If I have a bag of this size, will it fit? Basic stuff that they normally would have to call up and ask questions of that they'd much rather just jump online and ask in a different environment. But you wouldn't think that there'd be people excited to help people answer policy questions. There are. Healthcare, we're seeing more and more people reach out to each other to help offer everything from emotional support to support around, what have you tried for migraines? Did that drug have side effects? So on and so forth. Learning, where beyond just the tech support, something broke, I need help. I had a whole conversation with a friend of mine. You'll meet here in a minute, who is a network engineer, and he was talking about how he's really trying to work hard towards these certifications that he needs to have. And went online to Cisco's learning tools and really dove in and got help from random people that were just offering up their help, right? These are all what I call superfans, these people that are wanting to engage with others around the brand because it helps them in their daily lives, either from their work, from their personal pursuits, from their hobbies, and that sort of thing. So when I talk about superfans, we've probably all seen this 90-9-1 concept that 90% of your audience is a reader, is a lurker, is a consumer of information, but they don't really engage much. 9% tend to be active, but they may not be around all the time. And then you have that 1% that I'm sort of generically calling superfans. That 1% group that they show up later, they lead the culture. They show up early, they stay late. They lead the culture. They're doing really amazing things on behalf of the community at large, not just themselves. They're encouraging others to participate. They may be answering, for instance, in the Apple example, the tech support forum there. This 1% group was answering a huge percentage, much more than 1% of the questions that were being asked. The percentages may change, but the concept is the same. That you generally have in communities a very small number of people that are actively pushing and actively engaging. And we see this in our own lives too, right? I have a supper club that some friends participate in, and in that group of 8 of us, we get together once a month, and in that group of 8, there's probably 1 or 2 that are always on top of planning and reminding and making sure everybody shows up on time and remembering where we're going and what we're doing. There's a handful, there's a couple of us that will actively participate if asked, and then there's some that just, they're really excited, they're part of the group, but they don't remind us that the date is coming up. We have to remind them, right? And so, any social group breaks down this way. We're talking about that 1%. And what I tend to talk about when I say superfans, I define it a little more even just that 1% of participation, but it's also the type of participation. So they all get wrapped around a higher calling of some sort. So in the Lego case, that idea that Lego is a creative medium, that was a higher calling for themselves. It wasn't just that they could have found any other creative medium to use. They could have picked up paints, they could have picked up charcoal pencils, they could have picked up anything else to be creative. They wanted specifically to drive the Lego creativity because they believed in that as a higher calling, something that was bigger than themselves, that the community that they were participating in was doing something to make kids really enthusiastic. If you look at this picture, you can see the looks on these kids' faces as well as their parents for that matter. This higher calling of getting that sort of joy out into the world was always something that drove, or always is something that drives the Lego fans. And that passion for the brand, for the concept, for helping is also a key part of this. We'll talk about passion in a second, but that is definitely a core attribute of a superfan versus just a active or interested customer. Deep knowledge of the product, deep knowledge of the history, deep knowledge of the company, of the culture around the company, and a desire to share. So a interested, active, enthusiastic customer may love the brand, may feel like they're part of the higher calling that the brand sets forth, but they're not necessarily going out of their way to pull others in. And if you've ever talked to somebody who's passionate about their hobby, you know that the first thing that they may talk to you about is, hey, I love this thing. Let me share it with you. I love photography, so I'm always talking about features people can use on their iPhone, or, oh, you just bought a new DSLR camera. Great. Let me show you 2 things that you really need to know. They don't often ask, but I'm just that passionate about it, and my desire to make sure that they are able to share their work, their improvements, is part of my enthusiasm for that concept. And then sense of belonging, that again, I can be enthusiastic, I can be passionate, I can have deep knowledge, but if I'm not really that interested in being part of something bigger than myself, I'm probably not going to fall into this superfan category. And last, I just wanted, before we kind of switch gears here, I wanted to talk about kind of these 4 main points of why superfans are even important to companies. And at this point, it's 2017. The idea of online community, the idea of passionate customers, is not something I have to convince anybody in this room is important. But I will sort of remind why superfans. They seem more difficult to deal with, perhaps sometimes. They may be more expensive to fund programs around than just traditional ad buys. And they require a lot more energy and effort than maybe a traditional marketing program, because it is an ongoing thing. Once you start to engage with somebody and build a relationship with somebody, whether that's a person in your company, whether that's a person in your personal life, or whether that's a superfan, that relationship needs to be sustained, and so why bother? And I think the 4 biggest pieces are this idea of credibility. So they bring a level of credibility to the audience, on behalf of the company, that you can't get yourself. This is an event. These pictures that you're running, by the way, are coming from the Swedish adult fans of Lego AFOL group, and these are events that they've put on themselves. So you can imagine when somebody shows up and says, this is fantastic, Lego really builds an amazing event, and then they hear, no, this is from fans that volunteer because they love the brand. There's an entirely different type of credibility that comes out of that. Those resources, the amount of adult fan AFOL groups that are around the country, around the world, are significant, and they're far outpacing the amount of effort that Lego could put in themselves on behalf of customers. So, Lego may be able to create, and I'm completely making this number up, 5 events a year, whereas there may be 50 or 150 groups around the world that are putting on events on a regular, sustained basis. And that enthusiasm comes through as well, that it helps to remind people in the company what you can do with the product. I talked to somebody at Cisco that makes network routers and that sort of thing at one point a couple of years back, and they said, we love our fans because they help to remind us how cool our products actually are. And then, of course, they're bringing in revenue, and I put that at the bottom of the list because in some ways that's the least interesting. But I talk to a lot of fans throughout a lot of industries and have done so for many years, and I'm continually struck by how many people come back and say, I just wish the company knew. So today I wanted to give 5 very quick confessions that I hear on a regular basis to make sure that you understand where they're coming from as you start to design and think about fans and how they relate to your own business. And the first one is, I'm not weird, I'm passionate. And so this is my friend Ricky I was just talking about, network engineer by day and strange football fan by night. He painted his face recently and went out of town, spent his own money, stood in the heat, and cheered on his team. Not my team and not my sport, so I don't really understand it, and it seems really strange to me, but to him it was the most standard, normal thing in the world. And I think we get stuck really a lot of times in thinking people that don't have our same hobbies or our same interests, they're weird, they're strange. Why would you do that? Why would you spend 3 or 4 hours a day volunteering on a tech support forum answering questions? Because, well, there's reasons for that. And it's that passion comes through. It's a sense of community, right? When when he blew out this picture, he sent me 2 pictures. The first one was him zoomed in, and then he showed me this one. It suddenly made sense, right? He's part of something bigger than himself. Second, I'm not in this for the stuff, but can I get more stuff? The very common question I get from especially from senior executives as we start to work on fan programs of some sort is, well, they're just in this for the stuff, right? They just want to get stuff from us, and that's entirely the wrong frame. Although stuff matters, the tangibles are important. As we just talked about, they're doing it for passion, right? They're doing it because they're part of something bigger than themselves. They have that sense of belonging. They're not doing it simply because they can't pay for their own products, right? I'm an Apple fan. I love Apple products. I'll talk to you all day long about Apple stuff and convince you that the Apple ecosystem is much better than anything you'll get on Android from Samsung or LG or whoever else. But that's me. That's my interest. And I'm excited about that, right? That's where I start. And if Apple were to send me something and say, hey, you know, we had this new product coming out. We wanted to make sure you had one because we know how enthusiastic you are. That's not why I'm doing it. Quite the opposite. When they do that, they're recognizing me and my contribution. And that, in some ways, that's the most important thing we can think about as we think about tangibles with superfans is how do we recognize what they're doing and how do we say to them, we appreciate your contribution. That may come in the form of stuff, but that stuff can be everything from inviting them and maybe even flying them into an event with your team, can be trophies, you know, sort of yearly awards, could be responding to their request for support for events. So the adult fans, for instance, are regularly doing events, and they call up Lego and they say, hey, I'm doing an event. Can I get better signage than what we could afford on our own? Because it makes our event look more professional, which in turn makes Lego look more widespread from a brand message and whatnot. This is one of my favorites. This is ours. Thank you for your support. I've built a lot of communities. I've run communities from companies, and there's this strange dynamic at play where you say to a fan, I have built you a place that I control, but it is yours, and that's okay with me. You've spent the money to hire the team to make sure that the moderation stays positive, that the tone of the community stays positive, that the platform stays secure, that you're continuing to fund it and justify it, and every day you're going and talking to your executives saying, don't shut it down, it makes sense. But at the same time, you're going out of your way to remind yourself, to remind them that you don't own this, that this social space, the relationship, the connection between the people is not yours, it's theirs. And the best case scenario is one where you end up with your contribution plateauing and sort of reducing and plateauing, and theirs increasing. And that doesn't mean that you're looking for them necessarily to take over the technology or to take over the moderation staff or anything like that. You're looking for them to take over the leadership, to take over the social space, to make sure that they feel like this is our space. And in that context, it's incredibly important to make sure that you remember that this is their space, and as such, if you make changes, if you have to do updates, if you need to shut the site down for some regular basis, you have to make sure to discuss these things with them. There's nothing worse than fans who spend hours a day, and we saw this with the Apple Support Forum, where we were running this incredibly large community, one of the largest communities online, and had to keep the lights on, had to keep it running, and would have to shut down the site at times to do maintenance. And there was one time when I first got there that we didn't let the superfans know that we were going to do that, and so they logged on one morning and it wasn't working. There was a maintenance message up. We hadn't told them how long that was going to be for or what was going on, and I got a number of angry emails almost instantly saying, hey, I planned my day for when I was going to come in here, and now it's down. I didn't even know that was going to happen. What's going on? It's still my site. I've still got to own it and maintain it, but I am trying to get to a point where not only do they remember it's ours, but I'm communicating that within our company as well. Because at the end of the day, these are folks that can do amazing things on their own, right? This is the empty, no crowd version, but this is a picture of an actual adult fan-led event, right? This looks every bit as big, every bit as professional as something that Lego would put on themselves. right? They can do these things on their own. We want that connection. We want to make sure that we have that relationship with them because that's easier for us to influence and direct and encourage them in more positive ways for our business. We know more than you about your brand. In Lego in particular, but even in companies like Cisco and even Southwest or Apple, there's a lot of smart engineers that really think that they have a lock on the data about their own products. Fan groups tend to want to make sure that we remember they know more about the products than us. They know more about the history than us. They live the culture more regularly than us. People who love Apple products, if you go and talk to an Apple employee, they may, depending on the employee, remember what product launched 10 years ago in September. I guarantee you a fan of Apple, a true fan of Apple, is going to know exactly what that is. The Lego fans were always fascinating to me because they would want to challenge people, anybody who worked at the company, hey, do you know how many combinations 3 bricks can make? Whatever millions of combinations that number is, they'd know what it was. And even to this day, I still can't remember what that number was, and I worked there for nearly a decade. It's important to remember and respect that that is part of the passion. And as you start working with fans, if you have worked with fans, you'll know that that's a really difficult dynamic to get comfortable with because there's this I know more than you dynamic that's part of the fun for them. It's part of the annoyance for you. And to that point, the last confession that I hear on a regular basis, and this is the one that's the most impassioned in how they communicate it to me, is have as much fun as we do. I know you're at work, but have as much fun as we do. I don't understand why you don't love this as much as I do. Because we all get stuck in our daily routines, right? In the grind of how much we've got to talk about budgets, and we've got to talk about the political issues inside. We've got to talk about the realities of what we're going to launch and when. We go home with the stresses of whether or not we're going to meet our objectives for the year, and are we going to get a raise? Are we going to get fired? All these things that go into this dynamic that fans don't. And the relationship between company and customer is a critically interesting one for fans, right? It's one thing for me to be an Apple fan. It's another thing for me to have a personal relationship with somebody at Apple where I have a question and I can pick up the phone and call and talk to them. And that's part of this idea of instead of just an active customer, I have a super fan. You're building these relationships and these connections. But in order to do that effectively, in order to make sure that they are as excited to work with you as you are to benefit from them, that idea of this is fun, this is really exciting. They're going home from their jobs to do the thing that you're at work for. And finding that balance between having as much fun as they do is incredibly important. But also, the idea of what fans are doing is always such a positive one because you can see the enthusiasm for what you're working on. Like I said at Cisco, the Cisco example, one of my friends that worked there said, we talked to our fans, our most interested, engaged, enthusiastic people, because it reminds me that we're doing really cool stuff, and that can get lost in the course of a day. And just to close out, I wanted to thank Anders, who's actually here in the audience with us, for helping me with a lot of the photos for the local activities that are happening. These are all Swedish events that you saw pictures of. But I also wanted to point out that when we talk about fans as this sort of strange group of people that are out there in the world somewhere, they're all around us, right? We're all fans of something. We all have hobbies that are interesting to us, and we all have connections with companies that we love. Usually as an activity on top of what we're doing. Not a lot of us get to be as lucky as I have been in working for some of my dream companies over my career. But people like Anders is actually here for his job and also representing the adult community. They are all around us. So a big thanks for him for helping me prepare for today. And I'll go ahead and close out. If you have any other follow-up questions about fans, as you can probably tell, I'll talk about fans all day long with as much depth as you're interested in hearing from me, because I'm sort of a super fan for super fans. This is my email address. Feel free to give me a shout. And I think we have a couple minutes for questions.
Thank you so much, Jake. This is really exciting. Is Anders really here? Are you here? Yeah, look, a real super fan. That's how they look. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi,
one.
Anders. One thing I think that you may have heard many times, but if you have these superfans and you kind of use them in your product development and stuff, don't you lose control of your brand and your... Right? You have heard that one before.
So I have,
Yeah.
and in fact, I'm laughing because I only had time for 5 confessions. That probably would have been 6.
Yeah.
Yes, that is a huge issue we hear all the time. It's a big part of my work is trying to convince companies that you never had control in the first place. You just thought you did. The control came more from the fact that you didn't ask anybody what they thought than it did from actually having control. And I don't know that there's a lot of value in control either. Beyond a certain set of issues, right? So, the control issue for us, when I was at Lego and starting a lot of this work, and I know it's continued on throughout the years, this idea of we don't want Lego fans out there doing things that represent the brand. I kept saying, they're the perfect representation of the brand. What's your concern? And the concern was, we want to make sure that our brand is portrayed properly.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, how would you do it? How would you want to fix that? Well, this signage isn't appropriate. It's not on brand standard.
Yeah.
Great. Let's give them some signage that's on brand standard, and they don't have to worry about that. Let's just give them that part, solve that, and we still are allowing them to showcase the representation of the brand that's so great.
Should you, if you have like super fans and they have events and stuff, should you use that in your content as a brand, showing, look, and how should you use it? Like, for example, look at this cool event our super fans created. Is that something you should do as a company?
Well, yes, with the caveat that you don't want to pander, right? You're not. Yeah. We see this all the time where, and you've seen ads before where, a real person says some quote, and you go, yeah, and that's not true. Because we all know, it's like when you read a press release and there's some line from the CEO that says, we believe the following. You know full well that the PR team wrote that. The CEO may or may not have even seen that. They may or may not have cared to approve it or not. We all know that that's not real. Customers are the same way. When they see a quote from a superfan, there's a real question of, is that valuable? So I think that, yes, it's absolutely worthwhile. The question is, how are you real with that?
Yeah.
How are you not sort of downplaying or even disregarding the reality of it in order to promote what's good about it?
So you can do it, but
you can do it, but make sure that it's sort of true to the spirit of what it is in the first place.
Mats, do you have any questions?
Yes. Is it possible to apply this thinking in a business-to-business company?
Yeah. B2B companies, do they have superfans and can they use them?
Yes, they absolutely do. It's a lot different in many ways, right? A B2B group isn't necessarily a group of superfans that's going to go out and put on events on behalf of the company. But a B2B community that's helping people connect and solve their business problems is going to have a group of people that sort of rise to the top as the leaders, as the social directors, so to speak, right? Back to the dinner party example, there's always going to be that 1 or 2 people that make sure everybody knows when the date is. In a B2B community, it's the same dynamic, right? Because we are talking about whether it's an oil and gas industry or a creative industry or a content industry, whether it's for tech support, whether it's for learning, when you get groups of people together, they tend to behave in the same basic set of social dynamics. How you actually drive those social dynamics can be different for B2B or a creative pursuit, but it absolutely is possible.
I know you started by saying this, but could really any business use superfans? Like fertilizers or, well, toilet paper or really, could any brand use superfans?
So I believe yes.
Yeah.
That's the highlight. The part that lies under that umbrella is, what are you trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And how are you trying to achieve it? So toilet makers may not be, you may not find superfans around the actual toilet that the toilet maker himself makes, but plumbers getting together to help each other support through products where the manufacturer of a product, whether it's the toilet maker, the pipe maker, the fixture maker, says, we're not just going to promote our brand, we're going to promote the industry. We're going to promote the topic. And you see this more and more where a healthcare provider may say, I hope you use our services, but more importantly, we're building a place where you can come and talk about cancer. You can come and talk about diabetes. It's sort of sponsored by a particular brand,
Yeah.
but it's not a direct encouragement of only that brand's product.
Okay. A big thank you to Jake.
Thank you.